Okay, good morning. The subcommittee will now please come to order. Good morning. From data breaches in the United States to a cell phone hacking scandal in Great Britain, consumer privacy has become part of our national consciousness. Today we have a unique opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of millions of Americans, and I look forward to working with Chairman Walden and members of both of our subcommittees on this unique challenge. We often hear that privacy laws in Europe are much stricter than they are in the U.S., and if that's so, it's hard to understand how the phone hacking incidents in Britain could have gotten so far out of hand. It raises the question of whether American consumers are as vulnerable as politicians and celebrities in London. I hope that Chairman Janikowski will address this issue as we continue to gather facts. The Chair now recognizes herself for an opening statement. This morning we begin a very important and some say long overdue debate. When it comes to the Internet, how do we, as Congress and as Americans, balance the need to remain innovative?
Madam Chair, is the microphone on?
It is.
Okay.
Thank you. You just have to get used to a female chairman.
Okay.
When it comes to the Internet, how do we as Congress and as Americans balance the need to remain innovative with the need to protect privacy? The explosive growth of technology has made it possible to collect information about consumers in increasingly sophisticated ways. Sometimes the collection and the use of this information is extremely beneficial. Other times it's not. Frankly, I am somewhat skeptical right now of both industry and government. I don't believe industry has proven that it is doing enough to protect American consumers, while government, unfortunately, tends to overreach whenever it comes to new regulations. That's why this debate must be deliberate and thoughtful, but without question it's time for this debate to take place. Even though it serves billions of users worldwide, and this year e-commerce in the U.S. will top $200 billion for the first time, the Internet pretty much remains a work in progress. Still, in just 25 years, the Internet already has spurred transformative innovations. It is indefinite value, and it has become a part of our daily lives. And it has unlimited potential to affect positive social and political change, as the world dramatically witnessed during the Arab Spring. But the Internet has brought about more subtle cultural changes as well. Think about it for a second. If a total stranger knocked on your door one day and asked you for your name, your birthday, your relationship status, your number of children, your educational background, email address, and social security number, would you give that information out freely? Probably not. Yet today, as consumers, we willingly dole out this personally identifiable information online, literally bit by bit. This information is then compiled and collated by computers to produce personal profiles used in online behavioral marketing and advertising. This data mining helps to pay the freight for all of the information that we get for free on the Internet. But does it come at too great of an expense to consumer privacy? That question cuts to the heart of this very important issue. Applications providers continue to increase the variety of tools available to American consumers to control their privacy settings, but a nagging problem for most consumers is the lack of a basic understanding about how companies use and collect this information. While survey after survey indicates that consumers harbor serious concerns about their privacy, it is unproven and unclear whether more stringent laws and regulations relating to the collection and use of data will satisfy these concerns in a way that encourages continued innovation and an expansion of electronic commerce. As Congress takes a closer look at online privacy issues, industry has stepped up its self-regulatory efforts relating to the collection and use of consumer information. These industry-wide efforts include expanded consumer education and site transparency to increase consumer comfort with how industry uses their information, as well as the development of new preference profiles so consumers can personalize their browsing experience and control just how much information they actually want to share. As I listen closely to all of your thoughts, I'd also like to share a few of my own with you. First and foremost, greater transparency is needed to empower consumers. While it's still unclear to me whether government regulations are really needed, providing consumers with more transparency is the first step in better protecting Americans. Consumers should be notified promptly if there is a material change in a privacy policy. No bait-and-switch scheme should be allowed nor tolerated. Sensitive information should have greater safeguards in place, especially when it comes to financial and personal health records. We should take a long look at how our children are treated online and how they are marketed to. And we need to closely re-examine privacy laws that are currently on the books. Do we need a single regulator to protect consumer privacy? While I personally support this concept, we should first look at its potential impact on consumers. And finally, what part should no harm, no foul play in this debate? Over the last few months, the FTC and the Department of Commerce have issued extensive reports concerning online privacy. However, there is little proof of any substantive consumer harm. Before regulations are enacted, there should be a definable problem, such as we are seeing in the area of data protection. As we move ahead with our hearings, I look forward to robust discussion with all of my colleagues on the committee, as well as industry and consumer groups. Working together, we can make innovation and privacy a shared priority, and the Internet will be the eighth wonder of the world. And now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Let me inquire, was it my understanding that this side was going to be allowed 20 minutes to make opening statements, and I can yield those as I see fit? Is that right? Yes. I see. That will be fine. That will be fine. Let me thank the two chairmen for holding today's joint hearing on Internet privacy. I look forward to the testimony from the three witnesses as we begin to talk about this very important issue. I also look forward to learning how Congress can better equip these three agencies so that we can best protect Americans' online privacy. With nearly every aspect of our lives now containing an online component, it is vitally important that Americans have reasonable protections for the personal information held and sold by the data gathering industry. That personal information can include specific websites a user has visited, how long they spent on that website, whether or not they purchased something, what they purchased, and what they looked at while they were there. It can even record their keystrokes. The personal information is collected often without a user's knowledge and without their consent. When a website installs tiny files on a user's computer to record Internet activity. These files are called cookies or flash cookies or beacons. While the term cookie doesn't sound particularly invasive, a recent investigation by the Wall Street Journal found that a test computer visiting the 50 most popular websites resulted in more than 2,000 cookies being installed without notification or consent on the test computer. What's worse is that the top 50 websites directed at children place substantially more tracking files on visitors' computers than general audience websites. The Wall Street Journal found children's websites place 4,100 cookies and other tracking mechanisms on their test computer, again, without notice or consent. Even more concerning is that the data gathering industry has developed ways to marry online data with offline data, like warranty cards and property records and voter registration records and even driver's licenses to build super files that are sold for pennies. Some companies are even using these super files to differentiate which of the same type of product they will offer to potential customers. For example, a life insurance clearinghouse website tested a system that would recommend different policies based on the personal information contained in the files. This practice is called boxing, and I would argue that it is nothing more than a high-tech form of economic and social discrimination. In addition, having all this data in one place puts Americans at risk of other more traditional high-tech harms like identity theft and fraud. It's clear that businesses need to collect some information for their operational needs. Beyond that, however, I think it is well past the time to put in place some clear and comprehensive rules to let consumers know and exercise some control over what data gatherers can collect, how they can collect it, and what they can do with it once they have it. Madam Chairman, I hope you will work with me to craft legislation that will safeguard Americans' personal information so they can continue to use the amazing and infinite potential of the Internet in the safest and most secure ways possible. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman, and the chair now recognizes the Mr. Walden, Chairman of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to welcome our witnesses. As consumers are increasingly living their lives on the Internet and even more on their smartphones, concerns is obviously growing over electronic communications privacy. Indeed, the Energy and Commerce Committee has taken an active role in investigating online privacy in the last few Congresses. Mr. Barton, for example, has sought out information from a number of companies about their practices regarding Internet advertising and consumers' online information. Members of the committee have reached out to Google about privacy concerns arising from Google Buzz, as well as their collection of data from personal Wi-Fi networks, something I know the FCC is investigating. And just this past April, Chairman Upton, Chairwoman Bono Mack, and myself, along with our Democratic colleagues, also sent letters to several mobile operating system providers such as Apple, asking hard questions about the location-based services they provide and about the privacy protections attached to those services. And both the Communications and Technology and the Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade subcommittees have had a number of hearings in recent years. Now, we're having this hearing because we want to make sure Americans have adequate information regarding how data about them and their Internet use is collected, used, and shared, and to make sure their privacy is protected. But we must balance that need with the recognition that regulatory overreach could curb the ability of entrepreneurs to invest, innovate, and create jobs and new technologies. At this point, it's not clear what legislation, if any, is necessary, but this hearing will help shed light on this question. As we move forward, one thing stands out in my mind. Today's regime is neither competitively nor technologically neutral. Section 222 of the Communications Act gives the Federal Communications Commission broad authority to implement privacy protections for consumers of wireline and wireless telephone services. Section 222 also specifically calls out location-based services for regulation, but applies that regulation only to carriers and not providers of devices, operating systems, or applications. Other parts of the Communications Act give the Commission authority over cable operators and satellite television providers under a prior consent framework. In stark contrast, there are few, if any, communications privacy regulations governing web-based companies, even those that can access a user's search queries, emails, voice and video online conversations, web browser, and even operating systems. So why should a wireless provider that transmits data to and from a smartphone be subject to a federal oversight, but not an operating system provider that has access to the exact same data? If we move forward with legislation, how do we create a fair playing field? Do we regulate web-based companies up? Do we deregulate traditional phone and video companies down? Do we create a unified regime at the FCC, at the FTC, or do we have both agencies administer equivalent regimes over different subsets of companies or devices? So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on what steps they're taking on electronic communications privacy and what recommendations they have for us as we examine these issues. One more thing. Although we're here to talk today about Internet privacy, I want to echo Mrs. Bono Mack's concerns about what happened in the United Kingdom. And I'll be interested to hear from the chairman, Janikowski, if things like this have happened in the United States, whether it falls within the FCC's purview, and if so, what the FCC and other federal agencies typically do about it. With that, I appreciate the opportunity to share those comments and yield the balance of my time to the Vice Chairman of the Communications and Technology Subcommittee, the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is a necessary hearing, and I want to thank our panel. It's a powerhouse panel, and I thank you for coming up here, Mr. Strickling. I think we should have an office for you. You're up here so much anymore. I think two words or two principles regarding privacy policy. One is balance, and the next is transparency. There's no doubt that if there is one drawback or inhibition about e-commerce, it is the consumer's fear over violation of privacy. We know when we do a transaction online that we have to provide information to the entity that we're doing business with or engaging in some type of commerce with. What we don't expect, unless it's transparent and open to us to help make our decision, is the use of that data. It has to be easy for the consumer and for the company, but also something that everyone knows up front. What we can't have and what degrades the confidence is what has occurred with Google Buzz, a trusted company that now has obtained personal information, and we have no idea what it can be used for or will be used for, or when major companies or entities hack to obtain personal information. All of these things should be clear. They're not transparent. There's no balance involved in those, and that's what we need to deal with.
I thank the chair and the vice chair, and I'm happy to now recognize the ranking member of the Communications and Technology Subcommittee, Ms. Eshu, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's nice to see you in the chair. Today marks our first joint subcommittee hearing of the 112th Congress on Internet privacy, and I welcome it and welcome the witnesses, the distinguished witnesses that we're going to hear from. The government agencies that are testifying today have taken initial steps to address the issue of Internet privacy, but I think we need a unified approach that leverages the expertise of both the public and the private sectors. The FTC has conducted a series of roundtables exploring privacy issues and has proposed a framework for approaching these issues. The FCC brings years of experience managing communications privacy issues dating back to wiretap legislation in the late 1960s. And the NTIA has played a significant role in establishing the Department of Commerce's Internet Policy Task Force's report on commercial data privacy and innovation in the Internet economy. That's a real mouthful. There should be some acronym for that, I guess. Personal privacy is, I believe, a very closely held American value. I think it's in our DNA. We don't want the government to know. We don't want companies to know. We want to, we hold it very, very close. And today, information is shared more freely and faster than ever before, especially by the younger generation. We need, in our country, a comprehensive approach to privacy. And it may be that it may be appropriate to start by updating the rules protecting children online. Children on the Internet share photos, email addresses, and phone numbers with friends and family. There are advancements in smartphone technology which enables parents to monitor the location of their children. But based on a town hall meeting that I had on the issue, parents need an awful lot of education on this. They have a sense of what's going on, but they don't know what to do with it or how to. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, enacted more than 10 years ago, I can't believe that over a decade has passed since we did that, never really anticipated these advancements. So whether dealing with children, teens, or adults, transparency really needs to be the coin of the realm. It should be the central focus of ours. Consumers should know what personal information is being collected, how it's being used, and who has access to that data. At a minimum, companies should be required to disclose if they buy or sell consumers' information, or if they track the whereabouts of consumers even after they've left a company's website. Both the public and private sectors have a lot of work to do to educate consumers and businesses and ensure that the collection of data is done in a transparent and secure manner. I think it's also important that we don't overlook the proactive steps being taken by industry to enhance user privacy. According to Facebook, almost 35% of their 350 million users customize their privacy settings using options provided by the company. Similarly, millions of users of the popular web browser Mozilla Firefox install add-ons to prevent online advertisers from collecting their information. And Reputation.com, based in my district, is developing tools to help consumers and businesses protect their online privacy. But it's spotty. There isn't anything that ties all of this together, and I think that's why we're here today. So I think with the right balance, we can protect privacy without inhibiting job creation and the development of new, innovative, data-driven apps and services. There's such a demand for that in our country, and we don't want to stand in the way of it. Our government agencies have a difficult task ahead of them, I think. Each of our agency witnesses today is going to provide an expert view on the issue of Internet privacy, and I really look forward to hearing what you have to say. Specifically, I'd like to know what each agency thinks their role should be, what their hand is in this, and how we can leverage the wide range of online privacy tools developed by the private sector, because it's both. and how do we increase coordination between government agencies as well as industry. At this point, Madam Chair, it's been mentioned today, I'd like to call on the chairman of the full committee to use the jurisdictions of this committee to probe the whole issue of privacy, hacking, and what is burgeoning out of this burgeoning scandal of News Corporation. It fits with the subject matter that we are here in a joint hearing today for. This is one of the most powerful committees in the Congress. We certainly have the jurisdiction, and I think it needs to be exercised. So again, I welcome the panel, and I thank you for the testimony that you're going to give, and look forward to hearing it. And I yield back.
Expired, and the chair is pleased to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Upton, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am excited about the hearing. This committee has been at the forefront of protecting the privacy of Americans for many, many years, and that mission certainly continues today. When I became chairman of this great committee about 6 months ago, I guaranteed that our focus would be on jobs, the economy, and the preservation of individual freedoms. And I asked everyone to look at our mid-year report, which we released last week. There's a good deal in there about the literally millions, hundreds of thousands of jobs that this committee has worked to protect and create. Today, though, we begin a very thorough analysis of what has become an essential freedom for all Americans. The Internet has changed all of our lives in so many ways. Our freedom, unlike that elsewhere in the world, to use the Internet for information, commercial purposes, consumer needs, even health care, is unrivaled. And anyone who has access to a computer, even a BlackBerry, has access to the entire world. But that freedom also brings some very serious challenges. Privacy is chief among them. So I commend these two subcommittees for holding this hearing. And as we begin the effort, it's entirely appropriate to hear first from our federal witnesses, and I certainly welcome them. But I want to get the issue right. We all do. It is not and should not be a partisan in any way, and I don't believe that it is. If it means that the CMT and the CNT subcommittees, even oversight, need to hold multiple hearings, so be it. We need to hear from everyone with a stake in Internet privacy before we contemplate legislating. I yield now the balance of my time to the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to add a couple of points to the discussion as we move forward with our witnesses today, whom we do welcome and we appreciate your being here, we should bear in mind that online advertising sales, online ad revenue totaled $31 billion last year, and that represented 40% of global online sales. That spending sustains much of our free press and free content online. That is something we should be mindful of as we look at regulation in a space that really is growing by leaps and bounds, creating jobs and providing consumers with a dynamic platform for free content and innovative services. I think the European style do not track technology would short circuit much of this innovation, and as Chairman Bonomack said, it did not stop the situation there in the UK. I think that what we also have to do is be mindful of moving forward with anything where there is an ill-defined harm standard without respect of the cost that would be placed on private innovators and on the industry that is experiencing growth. We need to be cautious, thoughtful, and well-measured in our approach to this evolving issue, and I yield back my time.
Thank the gentlelady, and the chair now recognizes Mr. Stearns for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having had some experience developing privacy bills, I have with Jim Matheson from Utah this H.R. 1528, the Consumer Privacy Protection Act of 2011. And having been through these hearings, one of the things that clearly came out is exactly what you said, Madam Chairman, when you talked about consumers want transparency and a basic understanding of how their information is used. That came out time and time again, so you're absolutely right there. And I think that when we look at this very important issue, and I listen to stakeholders, I find that, Madam Chair, that the stakeholders, by and large, would like to know if there's one agency that has jurisdiction, so you know where to go to, how to comply. And if we're not careful and we have this jurisdiction that is moved between two or three government agencies, can make more difficult. So I think one of the things that we have today is a hearing to talk about jurisdiction, and I hope in the end that we won't have competing jurisdiction. We'll have at least one central agency with this jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman, and the chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank our chairs, Bono Mack and Walden, for holding this hearing today. As the Wall Street Journal just pointed out, firms are stripping away our Internet users' anonymity and, quote, gaining the ability to decide whether or not you'd be a good customer before you tell them a single thing about yourself. The collection, use, and dissemination of consumer information provides many benefits to consumers, businesses, and the marketplace, but they raise legitimate concerns about whether consumers have adequate control over personal information that's shared. Sophisticated business models and rapidly evolving technologies allow vast amounts of data to be collected, aggregated, analyzed, mined, and sold in ways that were unimaginable only 10 years ago. Many of these business practices conflict with consumers' expectation of privacy. I understand that the Republican majority is wary of passing any piece of legislation that calls for new regulations. We've heard the repeated calls for self-regulation. The problem is that self-regulation isn't working. Just this week, Stanford researcher Jonathan Mayer reported in Tracking the Trackers that 8 members of the self-regulatory group Network Advertising Initiative, NAI, seem to outright violate their own privacy policies. That's nearly 13% of the 64 companies investigated. In addition, NAI is just one of many self-regulatory efforts, so the consumer is left not knowing where to turn. Furthermore, even if the firms were complying, the self-regulatory efforts seem to be limited to allowing the consumer to opt out of behaviorally targeted advertising, but not the collection of information that makes targeting possible. The Tracking of the Trackers study found that 33 members of NAI either left tracking cookies or users' computers or installed tracking cookies after the users opted out. The firms seem to argue that they can continue to keep cookies on your machine as long as those cookies aren't being used to create specifically targeted ads. I also understand that the Republican majority has stated that it is not sure whether legislation is needed and that it does not intend to move too quickly on this important issue. I think it's well past time to move ahead. There were 6 privacy hearings in the 111th Congress. There were 6 privacy, in each of those 6 hearings, they made me more and more convinced that current law does not ensure proper privacy protections for consumer information. As I've stated in the past, I stand ready to work with my colleagues. This is not a partisan issue. It should not be a partisan issue. We've got to give the consumers the tools to protect their privacy without unduly burdening industry or stifling innovation. That should be our goal. This hearing can move us in that direction, and I look forward to the testimony that we're going to receive. And I'd like to, am I permitted to reserve the time, or do I have to yield?
You are allowed to yield your time.
I'd like to yield to Mr. Markey.
I thank the gentleman very much. And it is good to see you in the chair, Madam Chair. Nancy Pelosi has acclimated the Democrats to a woman in the chair, and it's good to see a Republican woman as well in such a position. In May, I introduced bipartisan legislation with Joe Barton to strengthen privacy safeguards for children and teenagers. Our bill, the Do Not Track Kids Act, would update the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act for the 21st century to cover newer applications and services like geolocation technologies that didn't exist when we passed the Children's Privacy Act 13 years ago that I was the author of. That bill is the communications constitution when it comes to protecting kids online, but we need to amend it to take into account the explosive growth and innovation in the online ecosystem since 1998. 1998 was way back in the BF era, the before Facebook era. And in addition to that law, our bill also contains common sense protections for teenagers. Our bill's digital marketing bill of rights stipulates that websites, online apps operators, and operators of mobile apps directed to teens clearly explain why they need to collect the data. Our bill also prohibits operators from collecting geolocation information without permission from parents when we're talking about children, and it finally includes an eraser button. That's an important privacy protection which requires operators of websites or online applications that contain or display personal information about children or minors to enable users to erase or otherwise eliminate publicly available personal information on a website about children. I would hope that the least that we can accomplish this year is to provide a privacy bill of rights for children in our country. We can see now what the implications are if that information gets hacked. And my hope is that we can update the 1999 law to accomplish that goal. I thank you, Madam Chair. I thank you. I thank the gentleman from California.
Thank the gentleman. And the chair now recognizes Mr. Barton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate you and Chairman Walden holding this hearing. I want to associate myself with what Mr. Waxman and Mr. Markey just said. If you have Joe Barton and Ed Markey on a bill, you pretty well cover the political spectrum, not only of this committee, but of the Congress. And I couldn't agree more with what former Chairman Waxman and current Ranking Member Waxman said, that privacy is not a partisan issue. And I do believe, as he said, that it is time to act. And hopefully this hearing and several others that we've already had, with the testimony we hope to hear from our administration officials, will lead to action in this Congress. I am co-chairman of the Bipartisan Privacy Caucus. I have been an advocate for privacy for almost 20 years in the Congress. In this year alone, I have sent letters, most of them with Mr. Markey or Mr. Walden or Mr. Stearns or others, to Facebook, AT&T, Sprint, the College Board, ACT, and even the Social Security Administration, questioning activities that they've engaged in that appear to impinge on our citizens' privacy. As Mr. Markey indicated, I've also introduced H.R. 1895, the Do Not Track Kids Act of 2011. And this legislation does 5 important things. First of all, it updates the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act of 1998. It adds protections for our citizens between the ages of 13 and 17. It would prohibit an Internet company from sending targeting advertising to children and minors. It would also prohibit Internet companies from collecting personal and location information from anyone who's less than 13 years of age without parental consent, and anyone less than 18 without individual consent. It would require website operators to develop something called an eraser button, which would give children and minors the ability to request deletion of their personal information that they do not wish to be available on the Internet. The time has come, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chairwoman. We know that we need a vigorous Internet. We know that we need a vibrant economy. But we should all agree that we certainly need to protect our privacy in the Internet age just as much as we did to the in the age before the Internet. With that, I would like to yield on the balance of my time to Mr. Olson of Texas for such comments as he wishes to make.
I thank my colleague from Texas. I thank Chairman Upton, Walden, and Madam Chairman Bonomack for y'all's leadership in calling this important hearing. As this is my first privacy-related hearing, I'm approaching the issue with an open mind, but not an empty mind. I think the key with approaching privacy is balance, transparency, and facts. And that's why we're here today. Consumers are becoming increasingly aware of their own privacy. It's important for them to know what information is being collected about them and how it is being used. In today's global economy, information is a valuable commodity. But we have to closely examine the many economic benefits the Internet and the data collection provides consumers and our economy and balance those with legitimate privacy concerns. We cannot legislate in search of a problem. So I look forward to examining this important issue further and to playing a proactive role in the future privacy discussions. I thank my colleague from Texas for the time and yield back.
I thank the gentleman and am happy to recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad we're meeting today to discuss this issue. You know, this issue is a whole lot more important to a lot of people than most folks realize, because most folks just don't realize how much they open themselves up when they go online, and how much of their personal information is subject to being stolen or misused every time they go online. In the interest of time, I'm going to cut to the chase. I understand the need, the industry's need for a legitimate and even playing field across the country, and customers' need on both sides, different sides of the same state boundary, to a reasonable expectation of privacy every time they go online. I recognize the need for that. I come down heavily on the side of privacy, though, but I'm interested in understanding how we can set forth rules of the road that are good for industry, but protect the same shared expectation of privacy that folks have on different sides of the same state boundary. Folks have a right to expect a reasonable degree of privacy when they go online, no matter where they live in this country. So I feel the need for us to do that. I look forward to discussing how we can do this, and I believe today's hearing is a big step in that direction. I want to thank our witnesses for addressing these concerns today, and with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and the chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and all the other chairs for holding today's hearing. I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists for being with us this morning. And it's nice to see you on this important issue. Today, millions of Americans rely on a variety of services and applications for a number of activities, including social networking and navigation and mapping services, among many others. As we all know, in today's economy, information is everything to everyone. We also know that technology changes continuously, every day. What is new today may not be new tomorrow. We must continue to encourage American innovation and foster growth and development of the next generation technologies. But it is also essential that we properly protect the private and personal information of consumers, particularly our young people. Privacy policies and disclosures should be clear and transparent. We should also understand the scope of information that is being collected, what it is being used for, the length of time is being retained, and its security. Ultimately, meaningful privacy safeguards should be in place while ensuring that we don't stifle innovation. It is clearly a fine balance, but we need to do it. I thank you again for holding this important hearing today, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on this issue, and I yield back my time.
Thank the gentlelady, and the chair recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, for 1 minute.
I want to thank you, Madam Chairman, and Congressman Walden for holding today's hearing. I especially want to say to you that I appreciate the work that we've done over several years on the issues of Internet security and your leadership on this issue. As a longtime consumer advocate, I have serious concerns about tracking practices, especially the undisclosed data gathering of user behavior. That's why I'm an original sponsor of Congresswoman Spears' Do Not Track Me Online Act. This bill would establish standards for a consumer-friendly do not track mechanism. I'm also co-sponsor of Congressman Markey's Do Not Track Kids Act, which would offer enhanced protections against the tracking of children and teens. And I urge the committee to consider these and other common-sense solutions to the tracking issue as soon as possible. I associate myself also with my colleagues who want to investigate or want more answers anyway, on the hacking scandal of the Murdoch Enterprises and its implications. We must hold Internet service providers and search engines accountable, and we have to hold service providers and search engines accountable for their actions, and I look forward to hearing from our panel today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady, and thank my colleagues for their opening statements, and now we turn our attention to our panel. We have one panel of witnesses joining us today. Each of our witnesses has prepared an opening statement that will be placed into the record. Each of you will have 5 minutes to summarize the statement in your remarks. On our panel, we have the Honorable Julius Janikowski, Chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. We have the Honorable Edith Ramirez, Commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission. And our third witness is the Honorable Lawrence Strickling, Assistant Secretary for the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Good morning. We welcome you back to the hearing room. And again, you'll be each recognized for 5 minutes, and I'm sure you're very familiar with the timers on the table. As you know, when the light turns yellow, you'll have 1 minute left. So as I have been admonished, please remember to make sure your microphone is on and close to your mouth. And at this point, I'm pleased to recognize Commissioner Ramirez for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Bono Mack, Chairman Walden, ranking members Butterfield and Eshoo, and members of the subcommittees. I'm Edith Ramirez, the Commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission. I appreciate the opportunity to present the Commission's testimony on Internet privacy. Today, personal information about consumers may be collected, sold, and used in almost every conceivable interaction a consumer has, both online and offline. For instance, a college freshman sits in her dorm room using the Internet to research depression for a paper she is writing for psychology class. When her research is done, she applies online for student loans to help her pay for her tuition. Later, heading out of her dorm room, she grabs her smartphone, which she uses to find the closest drugstore. At the drugstore, she uses a loyalty card to get discounts. Afterwards, when the student is back online, surfing the web and keeping up with friends on a social network, she sees advertisements for medication for depression and anxiety, as well as ads for high-interest credit cards and payday loans. These activities, made possible by technology unimaginable years ago, offer clear benefits to the student. She enjoyed easy access to information, received discounts at the drugstore, and connected with friends, all in the course of a few hours. But the student is likely unaware that data about her drugstore purchases, web activities, and location may have been sold to data brokers she has never heard of and added to a growing digital profile about her. She may not know that this information may be used for marketing purposes or to make decisions about her eligibility for credit. And she might be especially surprised to learn that her research into depression may be included in her digital profile and could be used when she applies for life insurance or might be sold to prospective employers when she graduates a few years later. The student is not alone in her lack of awareness that vast quantities of information about her are mined and sold every day. Most consumers have no idea that so much information about them can be accumulated and shared among so many companies, including employers, retailers, advertisers, data brokers, lenders, and insurance companies. The FTC wants consumers to have an effective notice and meaningful choices about what data is collected about them and how it is used. That, in turn, will engender the consumer confidence and trust that are essential for industry to continue to innovate and flourish. For decades, the FTC has been the nation's lead law enforcer on consumer privacy and data security. During this time, we have also engaged in substantial policy initiatives and educated consumers and businesses on privacy and data security. In recent months, we have brought a number of significant enforcement actions in this area, as described in our written testimony. Just 2 weeks ago, we announced an action against Teletrack, a company that sold lists identifying cash-strapped consumers to marketers in violation of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. To resolve our allegations, the company has agreed to pay a $1.8 million civil penalty and to submit to a court order that ensures that consumers' sensitive credit report information is not sold for marketing purposes. Privacy and data security also continue to be at the forefront of the FTC's policy agenda. In December, Commission staff issued a preliminary privacy report that recommended 3 bedrock principles. The first is privacy by design, the idea that companies should embed privacy protections into their products and services from the start. Second, companies should present choices about the privacy of personal data in a simple way, and at the time they are making decisions about that data. Third, companies should improve the transparency of their privacy practices, thereby promoting competition on privacy. Finally, the staff report called for the adoption of Do Not Track, a one-stop tool for consumers to control online behavioral tracking. The Commission has not taken a position on whether Do Not Track legislation is needed, but a majority of commissioners, myself included, supports widespread implementation of Do Not Track. In closing, I want to note that the Commission appreciates the Committee's focus on consumer privacy and data security, and we are prepared to provide any assistance that you may need on these critical issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And the Chair is now pleased to recognize Chairman Janikowski for his 5 minutes.
Thank you to the chairs and ranking members for holding this important joint hearing. The right to privacy is a fundamental American value, and the Federal Communications Commission has worked to implement congressional laws that protect the privacy of consumers when they use communications networks. The Internet and other new forms of communications raise new and difficult privacy challenges, particularly when it comes to children. The FCC is committed to working with Congress, the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Commerce, and our colleagues across government as well as industry and all external stakeholders to tackle these issues. To understand the importance of privacy challenges in the digital age, one must appreciate the extraordinary opportunities created by broadband Internet services. High-speed Internet, fixed and mobile, is an indispensable platform for innovation and economic growth, for our global competitiveness and opportunities to transform education, healthcare, energy, and public safety. To fully realize the benefits of broadband, people need to trust that the Internet and all communications networks are safe and secure. As our national broadband plan found, privacy concerns are a barrier to broadband adoption. When people and small businesses fear that new technology puts their privacy at risk, they're less likely to use those new technologies. Consider location-based services. McKinsey estimates that this growing sector will deliver $700 billion in value to consumers and businesses over the next decade. 2 weeks ago, the FCC, with the participation of the FTC, hosted a workshop on location-based services which identified consumer concerns about the use and security of their location information as something that must be addressed to seize the economic and other benefits of this new technology. In general, in this area, we need to strike a smart balance, ensuring that private information is fully protected, and at the same time ensuring a climate that encourages new investment and new innovation that will create jobs and improve our quality of life. At the FCC, our approach to privacy centers on 3 overarching goals: consumer control and choice, meaningful transparency about privacy practices, and data security. The Communications Act charges the FCC with implementing a number of privacy protection provisions. Sections 222, 338, and 631 give the FCC authority to protect the privacy and security of the network-related data of telephone, cable, and satellite subscribers. The FCC is also working to educate consumers and small businesses about privacy and data security. For example, we recently released a cybersecurity tip sheet to help small businesses understand and implement basic precautions to secure their networks and data, with which we have partnered with both the Chamber of Commerce, the National Urban League, and others to distribute. To make sure consumers are getting consistent and clear information and guidance from government agencies, we've partnered with the Federal Trade Commission, the Commerce Department, and the Small Business Administration on a number of education efforts like NetCetra and On Guard Online, which offer advice on how to protect children's personal information and guard against identity theft. These education efforts are part of an established track record of effective coordination between the FCC, the FTC, and other agencies. Now, technology can and must be part of the solution. I continue to encourage industry to take this very seriously, to use its expertise to empower consumers, provide transparency, and protect data. And as the government's expert agency on broadband and communications networks with a long history of taking common sense steps to protect consumer privacy, the FCC has an important role to play going forward. Our network-focused privacy and data security rules are settled and legally tested. Some updating of the Communications Act network-oriented privacy regime is appropriate for the digital age. This can be done harmoniously with other agencies' implementation of any generally applicable consumer privacy or data security legislation. We look forward to working with Congress, with my colleagues here at the table and elsewhere, and with all stakeholders outside of government to harness technology to promote innovation, job creation, and economic growth while protecting fundamentally important principles of privacy. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Secretary Strickling, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Bono-Mack, Chairman Walden, ranking members Butterfield and Eshoo, thank you very much for holding today's hearing and inviting the participation of NTIA. I'm also glad to be here with my colleagues, Chairman Janikowski and Commissioner Ramirez. All of us share a strong commitment to protecting consumers and promoting economic growth. For the past 2 years, NTIA has been hard at work as part of the Commerce Secretary Locke's Internet Policy Task Force to conduct a broad assessment of how well our current consumer data privacy framework is serving consumers, businesses, and other participants in the Internet economy. To guide our work, we have focused on 2 key principles. The first, and you've heard them from the other witnesses this morning, is the idea of trust. It's imperative for the sustainability and continued growth and innovation of the Internet that we preserve the trust of all actors on the Internet, and nowhere is this clearer than in the context of consumer privacy. Our second key principle is that we want to encourage multi-stakeholder processes to address these key policy issues. We want all stakeholders to come together to deal with these issues in ways that allow for flexibility, speed, and efficiency. We want to avoid the delay, rigidity, and lack of quick response often associated with more traditional regulatory processes. Last December, the Department issued a green paper on consumer data privacy, which offered a set of 10 policy recommendations and asked for public input on a series of additional questions. In this document, we proposed a 3-part framework for consumer data privacy. First, we called for the establishment of baseline consumer data privacy protections that are flexible, comprehensive, and enforceable by the Federal Trade Commission. We refer to this baseline as a Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights. This set of basic principles would provide clear privacy protections for personal data in which federal privacy laws that exist today do not apply or offer inadequate protection. Second, to flesh out the principles into more specific rules of behavior, we recommended that we rely on stakeholders in the industry, working with civil society and others to develop enforceable codes of conduct through a multi-stakeholder process. In our proposal, these codes would implement the basic consumer protections, but their adoption would be voluntary. And third, we recommended strengthening the FTC's Consumer Data Privacy Enforcement Authority. I believe our approach should welcome and attract bipartisan support. It's neither traditional top-down regulation, nor is it self-regulation. I think, to use the word that Vice Chair Terry used in his opening remarks, it provides a real balance between consumer protection and meeting the needs of industry to continue to grow and innovate. In March of this year, after engaging further with a wide array of stakeholders, the administration announced its support for legislation that would help better protect consumer data privacy in the digital age by establishing the baseline protections consumers need in legislation. And a broad array of stakeholders, including many businesses, have expressed support for this approach. Specifically, this legislation would provide consumers with more consistent privacy protections, thereby strengthening trust, and preserving the Internet as an engine of economic growth and innovation. Legislation would also provide businesses with a common set of ground rules and would put the United States in a stronger position to work toward reducing international barriers to trade and the free flow of information. Our recommendations for this baseline are based on a comprehensive set of fair information practice principles. In our green paper, we drew from existing statements of FIPS as the starting point for principles that should apply in this new commercial context. And as we develop a more definitive administration position, we are now examining how these principles would apply to the interactive and interconnected world of today. The Department is also continuing to work with others in the federal government to develop the administration policy on data security. Without sufficient data security, there cannot be effective data privacy. And in May, the administration submitted a legislative proposal to improve cybersecurity, which includes proposals to strengthen consumer protections in the case of data breaches. The administration proposal would help businesses by simplifying and standardizing the existing patchwork of state laws with a single, clear nationwide requirement, and would help ensure that consumers receive notification when appropriate standards are met. I want to thank you again for holding today's hearing and for the two subcommittees' commitment to addressing consumer data privacy issues. Working together, we can protect consumers in the digital age, as well as help businesses expand globally by reducing barriers to trade in international commerce. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you all for your unique insights, and I will recognize myself now for 5 minutes for questions. And Chairman Janikowski, we have all seen the headlines about the phone hacking scandal in Britain. Are you satisfied that sufficient safeguards are in place to prevent similar privacy breaches here in the U.S., or should Americans be concerned? And also, as mobile devices become integrated in our daily lives and consumers use them more and more for critical functions like banking, are we going to see an explosion of hacking incidents?
There are several laws in place that address hacking issues. There are federal wiretapping laws that prevent unauthorized hacking. Hacking, I guess, by definition is unauthorized. There are provisions of the Communications Act that criminalize interception of information. There are state laws that prevent it. Any hacking of phones should be investigated. There are criminal provisions, and they should be addressed very seriously. There are also issues around the security of devices themselves. Several years ago, there was an effort to improve the security of phones, including voicemails, for example, by providing for password protection on voicemails. The state of play now is that many carriers automatically provide password protection for voicemails. Others give consumers the choice. There's no question that greater protection can be accomplished by using the password protections, and that's an area that should be looked at.
Thank you. Commissioner Ramirez, the question of why a privacy regulation is needed is the policy question we must decide. If a regulation is needed, presumably there's harm or consumer injury, and the regulation is seeking to prevent. Setting aside data security related to personally identifiable information, or PII, where we know the potential harm of identity theft and other unlawful conduct, what is the harm or consumer injury when we are discussing Internet privacy? Are you aware of specific cases or examples?
What I would say is that the fundamental issue that the FTC is trying to address is the issue that increasingly information is being used in unexpected ways. Consumers simply do not know how the information that is being collected about them is being, number one, what information is being collected, and number two, how that data is being used. So the framework that the staff has proposed in its initial report seeks to balance basic privacy protections for consumers against the needs of the business community. But the fundamental aim is to provide increased information to consumers and choice and control over the information that's being collected about them and how it is being used.
But we've heard from many stakeholders that we really don't know enough about what the average consumer thinks about privacy, nor the use of his or her information in exchange for free content. We do know that opt-out rates are low, even in those cases where people click through the pages that describe what information is gathered and shared. That's not necessarily conclusive evidence that consumers don't care about their information, but it must mean something. What is the Commission doing to find out how consumers really feel about privacy and the use of their PII?
Well, we do know from public reports that there is survey after survey that shows that consumers are increasingly concerned about how their information is being used. They're increasingly concerned about privacy. We also know from public reports that there's been outcry by the part of the public when certain companies have not provided basic privacy protections for them. Furthermore, industry itself has recognized that there is a need for increased and greater consumer trust. The Digital Advertising Alliance has conducted a study, and they themselves recognize that there is a greater need to have consumers have greater trust in the marketplace in order for the marketplace to continue to flourish and for innovation to be promoted.
But you haven't, the federal government hasn't done a study in, 10 years? Do you or any of the other agencies have plans to conduct another study soon to gather hard data?
What we have done is that as the process laying the groundwork for the report that was issued by staff in December of last year, the agency conducted a series of public roundtables soliciting input from all relevant stakeholders that included industry, consumers, academics, technologists. We've also solicited written comments and received approximately 450 written comments that are currently being analyzed by staff, and the agency does intend to issue a final report later this year.
I thank the Commissioner, and the Chair now recognizes Mr. Waxman for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for recognizing me. The committee will soon be marking up a data security bill. That markup may involve defining what data must be secured. One approach might include requiring all data to have some minimum level of security if stored in the cloud or as it travels over a dump pipe. Under Section 222 of the Communications Act, customer proprietary network information, CPNI, must be protected. CPNI includes the time, date, duration, and destination number of each call, the type of network a consumer subscribes to, and any other information that appears on the consumer's telephone bill. Under the Cable Act, cable operators are supposed to secure personally identifiable information, but that term is not defined. Under the Chair's draft proposal, the term personal information means an individual's name or address or phone number in combination with an identifying number such as a social security number or driver's license number or financial account number, but only if there's also the required security code or password. I agree with Commissioner Ramirez that this is a very narrow definition. Mr. Strickling, we know what the administration thinks should be covered thanks to its draft proposal, so I won't need to ask you to answer this one, but I'm going to run through a long list, and I'd like to hear from Chairman Janikowski and Commissioner Ramirez to tell me, answering yes or no, should the following types of data be required to be secured? Commissioner, whichever one of you, IP address? Mr. Janikowski, do you think?
Yes, and I think the CPNI rules that we've implemented at the FCC are a very good starting point, but yes.
Ms. Ramirez?
Yes.
Okay. How about any unique persistent identifier, such as a customer number, unique pseudonym, or user alias, such as a Facebook username and or password? Ms. Ramirez?
Yes, if it could be linked to a specific individual or computer or device, yes.
I would agree.
How about medical history information, physical or mental condition, and information regarding the provision of health care to the individual?
Yes.
Yes, I would agree. And these are common sense things that people would expect should be kept secure.
Well, they're not in the bill now, so I'm trying to get the record to indicate that you think they ought to be protected. Race or ethnicity?
Yes.
I would assume so.
Religious beliefs and affiliation, sexual orientation or sexual behavior. Do you agree those ought to be covered?
I do.
Yes.
Mother's maiden name?
Yes.
I would assume so. I haven't thought about that.
Okay. Well, a lot of websites ask for your mother's maiden name. Income, assets, liabilities, or financial records and other financial information associated with a financial account, including balances and other financial information.
Yes.
Agree.
Precise geolocation information and any information about the individual's activities and relationships associated with such geolocation.
Yes.
Agree.
Unique biometric data, including a fingerprint or retina scan.
Yes.
Agree.
Now, Commissioner Ramirez, when you were here a few weeks ago to testify about the Republicans' draft data security bill, you mentioned that the Federal Trade Commission is concerned about the limited scope of personal information that would be subject to the bill's data security and breach notification requirements. In particular, you discussed health information collected from companies not covered by the HIPAA law. I agree that the FTC should be concerned about this, but I have another concern. It's not clear to me what would happen when the company that is breached can argue that it does not know what type of information was breached. Recently we heard of an extensive breach at Dropbox. Dropbox is a popular cloud computing service that allows its 25 million users to store documents and other files on its servers. These users may store innocuous documents like a grocery list or pictures of nature, or they may store sensitive information such as an application for a loan or compromising or embarrassing photos. Dropbox could argue that it is in a cloud provider of storage that doesn't know what its users put there, and that those users expect it not to go snooping through their files to find out. Shouldn't Dropbox and companies like it be required to have a certain level of data security? And similarly, shouldn't Dropbox and companies like it be required to notify its customers of a breach, even if it does not know what data it holds?
I'm not in a position to comment on specific practices, but what I will say is that companies should provide reasonable security for personal information and private information of consumers. So depending on the nature of the specific facts and depending on the information that is being stored and the size of the company, a number of other factors, reasonable security measures ought to be provided, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank the gentleman, and the Chair is pleased to recognize Chairman Walden for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chairwoman for that. And I wonder if I might enter into a colloquy with the former Chairman. Could you just tell us what bill you were referencing? We were trying to figure that out over here.
It's a draft that has not been introduced with a number, but we have a markup in the Consumer Affairs Committee next Wednesday, as I understand it.
Okay, I'm not on that committee, so we were just curious what it was.
This is a joint hearing of the two committees, subcommittees.
Understood. Mr. Strickland, I'm kind of interested in some of the things that your colleagues there were able to comment on. Does the administration's position through your NTIA legislation, do you share those same positions as were articulated by the FCC? And FTC?
So the administration put forward in May a proposal for data breach legislation that covered many, I can't say all of the items that Congressman Waxman listed out for these folks, but many of them, such as the unique biometric data, unique account identifiers, those are all within the category of sensitive personal information.
Were there any that were articulated here that you would disagree with?
There might be some I'd reserve judgment on, but none I would disagree with listening to the list today.
Thank you. Chairman Jankowski and Commissioner Ramirez, I'm concerned about the uneven competitive playing field given the convergence of communications out there in the marketplace. Do you think it's fair for competitively, do you think it's fair or competitively neutral to apply privacy protections to carriers, but not, for example, operating system providers like Apple who have access to exactly the same consumer information?
The level playing field is a completely reasonable goal. How to achieve it is obviously a harder question, and to the extent that different sectors come from different backgrounds, have different competitive frameworks, the exact regulatory scheme might be different. But at the end of the day, I agree on your principles of technological and competitive neutrality.
Commissioner?
I also agree that there should be a level playing field. From the FTC's perspective, it's important that consumers be provided with basic privacy protections, irrespective of the entity that's providing the service. So the agency does take the view that if there is legislation, the agency ought to have jurisdiction over telecom common carriers.
Chairman Jankowski?
Well, there's a long-standing issue here. We disagree with our friends of the Federal Trade Commission on this point.
I wondered
the FCC brings years of experience and expertise operating under congressional statutes with respect to networks, wired and wireless, and privacy issues around them. That system has worked well, and any revisions to the statutory framework, in my strong opinion, should continue to recognize and take advantage of this long history of expertise. Now, our two agencies have worked very well together, cooperatively and collaboratively.
Well, I guess I think it's important there's some cop on the beat, if you'll allow me to use that. So I'm kind of curious about the Commission's action to enforce its CP&I rules and other consumer privacy protections. Can you just elaborate on that process for us?
Yeah, first of all, there's an ongoing education process, making sure that companies are certifying as to their compliance, and on a regular basis, our Enforcement Bureau issues notices of liabilities when companies are not doing that. Over the years, issues have emerged that the Commission is taking action on. Some people may remember the pretexting discussion of a number of years ago, where it was found that people were posing in order to gain access to records. The Commission at that point adopted some common sense rules to make it clear that that couldn't happen, and to put in place opt-out provisions, opt-in requirements for third-party efforts to access data.
Mr. Ramirez.
If I may add, I did want to clarify that I was by no means suggesting that the FCC's role should be displaced here. All I was saying was that we do believe that the FTC has significant enforcement experience that ought to be brought to bear here.
Got it. Mr. Strickling, do you want to comment on any of that?
I was hoping to stay out of that, actually,
Mr.
Chairman.
I figured as much. That's why I thought I'd ask you to wade on in.
I think what I will say is that the framework we're proposing, which would apply to all of industry, and does not intend by the proposal we're making to displace sector-specific regulation if there's a need for that. And I think we could all agree that there are certain industries, such as the financial services and healthcare industry, where I think additional protections are absolutely justified.
Indeed. Well, we appreciate your testimony today and working with you as we go forward to deal with this issue that we're all affected by and want to do the right thing on. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chairman Walden, and recognize now the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshu, for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you to each of you for your testimony and for the work that you've done on this. I mentioned in my opening statement that we need a unified approach, and while I really respect and appreciate the work that you've been doing, each agency is taking on what they're taking on. It's the same subject matter, but it's very difficult for me to see how this is all stitched together so that there's a comprehensive policy for the country. I think we can draw from the work that you're doing, but I think that that the Congress really either needs to update some of the laws that are on the books or do something that's overarching that is going to protect innovation, but also speak to the second decade of the 21st century that we're already in. That's my sense of what I've heard. To Chairman Janikowski, under current law, does the FCC have authority over ISPs to ensure that the proprietary network information of Internet customers is not being sold to third parties or used for the ISP's own marketing efforts?
Well, that is an area where clarification of the Communications Act would be helpful. There's uncertainty and unpredictability about that now, and in thinking about a level playing field, looking at telcos, cable, satellite, where there's clear jurisdiction of VoIP, telephony, voice over internet telephone service, where the FCC has acted as well. This is an area where clarification would be very helpful. And in the absence of it, there's a gap.
You do need legislative clarification.
Yes.
I hope all the members heard that.
Well, let me say that legislative clarification would be beneficial and would eliminate uncertainty and predictability.
Each word counts. Each word counts. Help me with this, and whomever wants to lean in on this. We're all concerned about children, and I think if there were to be a starting place, I think that we could develop consensus around that, because I think consensus already exists on it. Children, no matter what, are always the most vulnerable, no matter what the category is that we speak of. I think just about across the board that applies. Now, if we're talking about children versus those that are a little older but they're still teenagers, who's going to tell the truth about their age? when they're online. You know, I mean, if it's an 11-year-old, who's probably more adept at you know, traveling all of these lanes than someone that's 32 years old, but there's a restriction because of their age. Why would they tell the truth? So it seems to me that you know, this is something that we need to figure out. I don't know how we protect children if, in fact, we start out with that as an approach to this issue of privacy and all that's attached to it. Have any of the agencies given thought to this? And if so, what is it?
I'll take the lead, if I may.
Sure.
The agency, the FTC has certainly thought about these issues, and you certainly raised some very important practical concerns. The agency is currently undergoing a review of the COPPA rules, and staff is analyzing comments on
When are
that
you going to
issue.
finish that?
We will are moving forward with that and expect to be coming out with recommendations shortly.
But does it cover this issue?
Well, it's I can't comment on the specific recommendations that will ultimately made, but I will tell you that.
No, I'm not asking you what your recommendation is going to be. I'm asking you if you're examining this specific issue and when you're going to be finished.
The practical difficulties that do apply when applying that statute, yes. And in particular, the issues frankly become of greater concern when one speaks about teenagers who may raise even more significant concerns along those lines. And that's an issue that we've also are seeking comment on and will be addressing in our final.
My time's running out. Julius, Mr. Chairman.
I agree that a focus on children as a starting point is something that should be strongly looked at. Part of the reason is it's an area where there's the widest consensus that as a parent, that we want to make sure that we know how to basically protect our children and that the Internet is a safe place for them as well as a place that they can learn.
Are you looking at this?
We are looking at it with respect to communications networks, and we've been working with innovators in the area, encouraging them to develop tools. And I was in your district a couple of months ago, and at the Computer History Museum, we organized a showcase of tools and technologies that were being developed to help parents exactly with these issues online.
A lot of companies are becoming that much more sensitive about it. Well, I think my time's run out, but I think that this hearing is most helpful to move this issue along. Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady, and now recognize the Vice Chair of the subcommittee, Ms. Blackburn, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you all for your patience. Ms. Ramirez, I want to go back. In your testimony, you stated that you thought the harm was lack of choice or lack of knowledge of how their information is being used in your comments about the public. So what I'm wanting to know from you is, do you think that is justification for implementing Do Not Track? Are you going to come forward and identify some real harms so that you're articulating what the bad practices or the bad actions are that would require Do Not Track addressing? And are you planning to do any market analysis and market impact of any steps that you come forward with?
Let me first emphasize that the Commission is not advocating legislation in the privacy arena at this time. What we have done is to put out a broad framework of best practices that we recommend to industry, and also a framework that policymakers can consider should Congress decide to pursue legislation in this arena. As to your specific question regarding Do Not Track, that's just simply one element and one aspect of the recommendations that relate solely to behavioral advertising.
So you're not wedded to that as a template?
So what we have stated, and a majority of those of us on the Commission do advocate a universal Do Not Track mechanism. We've identified several elements that we think are important.
Okay, are you separating the online advertising from some of the aggressive social media networking as you do that analysis? Are you separating those two transactions?
again, online advertising, we do believe, a majority of us do believe that there should be a do not track mechanism that gives consumers greater choice about what information about them is collected and how that information is used.
Let me move on with you then. The Supreme Court case, Sorrell versus IMS Health Incorporated. The court struck down Vermont's Prescription Confidentiality Act, and Vermont's law restricted the ability of the pharmacists and drug manufacturers from using previous prescription data for marketing. Legal experts have claimed that this case will have implications for existing and proposed privacy laws. So yes or no, do you agree with the Supreme Court's ruling that restrictions on the collection and use of data must first pass the First Amendment scrutiny?
I do believe that if there's legislation enacted in this arena, there need to be considerations that were identified by the Supreme Court in that particular case.
Okay. Do you believe the government must defer to less restrictive alternatives in remedying privacy harms as the court found in the recent Sorrell case?
Again, I think the applicable standards of First Amendment principles apply.
All right. Let me move on with you then. Has anyone asked about Google Plus and what you all are doing? No one has. Okay. What is the FCC doing? FTC doing? I'll come to you in just a minute, Chairman Janikowski. What's the FTC doing now to oversee Google Plus and the new service that apparently there's some problems with? If you'll very quickly.
Yes. The FTC entered into a settlement with Google with regard to its rollout of its Google Buzz service, which was a social network service that it provided. The proposed order, which is yet to become final, contains a few key elements. One, it bars misrepresentations on the part of Google with regard to data practices. It requires Google to provide a comprehensive data privacy program and also to conduct privacy audits.
Okay, and then what is the FTC doing in regard to Facebook and the facial recognition technology? Do you think that poses a threat to privacy?
I'm afraid that I can't comment on specific practices or specific companies. What I will tell you is that the agency is looking very closely at the social networking arena as evidenced by the Google Buzz case that we just discussed.
Okay, thank you. Chairman Janikowski, back to who has the jurisdiction here. How do you square this? How do you think that overseeing the issue of privacy fits into the FCC's mission? Because I see it more closely aligned with the FTC. So just 30 seconds on that.
Congress has assigned the Federal Communications Commission for, since at least 1984, the responsibility for protecting CPNI or PII, various personal information on communications networks. And we've developed expertise around the engineering of those networks, the business practices of those networks. That continues to be important even as we move forward into this new area. And so it's the reason that we collaborate so closely with the Federal Trade Commission. We have a joint task force where we look together at some of these issues of overlap, and we bring different experiences and expertise to the table that I think on a net basis is very beneficial in the area. We have an obligation to make sure that anything we do together or any areas of overlap in jurisdiction are communicated clearly, and that the public and industry has clear guidance about what the landscape is and what they're supposed to do.
I'm over time, so thank you so much. Mr. Strickling, you're off scot-free.
If the gentlelady would just yield for 10 seconds to the Commissioner Ramirez. Yes. I thought I heard Ms. Blackburn ask about Google Plus, and your answer was not Google Plus. I was wondering if the answer would be...
I believe the reference was to the Google Buzz matter.
No, ma'am. I said Google Plus.
Okay. Again, I can't comment on non-public matters, so my response was in reference to a recent
Google Buzz
order on Google Buzz that relates to social networking.
Thank you, just for the clarification.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
And the Chair is now happy to recognize Mr. Butterfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Right now, we are grappling with how a data security bill should treat activities regulated under Gramm-Leach-Bliley. We are all wary of duplicative regulation. On the other hand, we don't want gaps in consumer protection. Both CNN and NPR have reported that banks, which aren't within the FTC's jurisdiction are selling information that they collect from credit and debit purchases. That is, they are selling their consumers' entire purchase histories to retailers. All calls for privacy legislation may be pointless if such legislation is limited to a select group of data collectors. For example, if privacy legislation is limited to companies within the FTC's jurisdiction, as are many of the current proposals in the House and the Senate, retailers such as Amazon would be limited in collecting and selling data about a consumer's shopping habits. But Citibank would be totally free to collect and sell that same information to Amazon. Do any of you have any concerns about such a scenario? Yeah.
I can address the question, and I will do it in reference to the draft bill that was discussed earlier, the Safe Data Act, where the agency does have a concern that is drafted. There is a carve-out with regard to data security and breach notification. There's a carve-out for entities that would be subject to the FCC's jurisdiction. So we do have a concern about that gap.
Some have suggested that any data security legislation or privacy legislation we draft should be written very narrowly because there are sector-specific laws on the books already. Others want it broad enough to ensure that all gaps are covered. FTC has experience sharing jurisdiction in other areas. Do you support data security or privacy legislation that could overlap with existing sector-specific regulation? Ms. Ramirez? Yes.
With regard to data security, we do support legislation. Again, keeping in mind that gap that I talked about, that is a concern. We do have limited jurisdiction in certain other respects. We do not have jurisdiction over banks, for instance, but we do support a general data security legislation.
All right, and to the chairman, Mr. Chairman, as you may know, the Internet service providers argue that they should not be subject to the requirements of any data security bill that this committee might consider. We've heard two basic arguments from them. One is that ISPs are just so-called dump pipes, and they don't know what information is being passed to and from their customers. The ISPs have also argued that the FTC regulation would be duplicative because FCC regulates telecommunication service providers through the CP&I rules that include breach notification requirements for CP&I. Should those who provide dump pipes, and I just heard that word for the first time the other day, should those who provide dump pipes that sometimes carry innocuous documents and that sometimes carry sensitive documents also be subject to some minimum security requirements for the data that moves along those pipes?
Well, one way to look at it is from the perspective of the consumer and outcomes. I think consumers just want to know that their private information that's put out on networks, and they don't know all the different details about what's this, what's that, that there are effective data security policies in place that they can rely on. And we want that as a country because not having that will hinder broadband adoption and the economic benefits of broadband. So I think we need to find a way to make sure that consumers have confidence in the safety and security of the Internet and the services that ISPs provide.
CP&I is the data collected by telecommunications companies about a consumer's telephone calls. It includes the time, the date, duration, and destination number of each call, the type of network a consumer subscribes to, and any other information that appears on the consumer's telephone bill. That's pretty vast. Does FCC, under these rules, protect data breaches of content? For example, if I subscribe to the service of one of the traditional telecom carriers and I receive a voicemail, which is content stored by that carrier, does that voicemail information have to be secured?
So there are two issues. I think from the perspective of the FCC rules and obligations on telephone companies, they have an obligation to provide security. From the perspective of third parties who might seek to hack in and get that information, that is a criminal violation that would be prosecuted by the appropriate authorities.
Well, what about if I subscribe to voice over IP service? I understand that voice over IP can transcribe a subscriber's voicemail message into email and text messages, so that voicemail, email, and text will exist as content. To the extent, and Madam Chairman, I didn't realize my time had expired. I'll save it for the next round. Thank you.
I would allow the gentleman to answer the question, though.
Yes. All right.
Well, I would say that the FCC has applied Section 222, the CP&I provisions, to voice over the Internet. We are reviewing whether there are gaps as technology evolves, and that's something that we'd look forward to work with the committee on.
All right. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman, and the chair now recognizes the chairman emeritus of the full committee, Mr. Barton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I think the questions that the committee members have been asking point out a fundamental issue that at some point in time we have to deal with. What information is personal and what information is private, and who controls it? We get the same question in almost a different format from every member of the committee. And hopefully in this Congress, in conjunction with our agencies, we can put into statute and into regulation the answers to that question. My first question is pretty straightforward to the members of the witnesses here before us. Congressman Markey and I have introduced a bill, H.R. 1895, which is the Do Not Track Kids Act, Privacy Protection of 2011. Do your agencies have a position on that bill yet, and if so, what is it?
I'll start. The administration has not yet taken a position on that or any other do not track legislation at this point in time. I think, though, it is clear and will emerge from the work we're doing now that the idea of providing more protection for children and for adolescents is one that we think ought to be incorporated in the fair information principles that we'll be proposing.
And at the Federal Communications Commission, the agency hasn't taken a position. Speaking for myself, the focus on children and the unique issues that are raised by children in the context of new technologies, I think, is appropriate.
Thank you.
And the FTC also has not taken a position on the legislation, but as I indicated earlier, the Commission does support the adoption and implementation of a do not track universal system.
Thank you. This question is for Commissioner Ramirez at the FTC. Several years ago, a company called Google used a technique called street mapping. This street mapping service amassed quite a bit of data of very private and personal information. Google testified before this subcommittee, or at least one of these subcommittees, about it and promised that it was done unaware at the corporate level and they were going to make changes. They also, in response to an inquiry by the FTC, made fairly significant verbal assurances that they would improve their behavior and do certain things. But apparently that's all they did. They really didn't change their business model, and it appears to me that Google has adopted a model of saying one thing in Washington and doing another thing in their business practices. We might need to drop the G from Google and just call them Oogle because of what they appear to be doing. I'm not saying they're doing it intentionally. So my question to you, Commissioner Ramirez, when you have a company like Google that doesn't appear to really follow up and doesn't appear to change their business practice, what should a regulatory agency like yours do to insist that they change business practices? And do you feel that you have the adequate statutory authority to make that happen, or do we need to pass legislation to give you that authority?
Let me just say that I don't want to focus on a particular company, but the agency is...
my question is on that particular company.
What I can say is that the agency is very vigilant when it comes to the issues about protecting personal information of consumers. With regard to Google, I did mention a recent proposed order that is soon to become final with regard to Google Buzz. In the situation that you identified, that investigation was closed, and I do believe that it highlights the limits of the FTC's jurisdiction in the following way. The agency has done quite a bit with its Section 5 authority, but there are limits. If a company has not engaged in engaged in misrepresentation, the agency would not be able to use its deception authority to pursue an enforcement action, and that was the case in the Wi-Fi matter that you identified.
So you think that Congress needs to give additional statutory authority to enforce that type of an action?
The FTC has not taken a position as to whether legislation is needed, but what I will say is that there are limits to the agency's Section 5 authority, and in my personal view, there does need to be more work. There needs to be more work in order for consumers to have basic privacy
under
protection.
current law, your authority is limited.
That's right. Our Section 5 authority will not reach all practices that can cause concern in this area.
Okay. My time has expired, Madam Chairwoman, but I would just point out for thoughtful purposes, if this Congress or one of these regulatory agencies attempted to either pass a law or pass a statute that required every citizen to wear a transponder and keep it active so that everywhere we went, any place we shopped, would be automatically recorded, not just by the federal government, but would be available to a private sector for use, our voters and citizens would come unglued. And yet, if you go on the Internet without your permission, that is the basic status quo. And I believe we need to take steps to put privacy back into the personal realm and take it out of the consumer marketing opportunity realm. And hopefully on a bipartisan basis we can begin to do that in this Congress, on this committee. And with that, I want to thank my two subcommittee chairmen and women for doing this hearing, and the ranking members of those two subcommittees for participating. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman, and now recognize Mr. Markey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to be following up upon the same line of inquiry that the gentleman from Texas and his son Jack were engaging in right now. You can see his interest in child online privacy sitting up there, and he's waving to you in thanks for the work that you're going to do to protect children online. So it's Jack Barton over there. So you heard this concern about an eraser button, that can be used to just say that children and minors. What were they thinking going to that site? What were they thinking putting that picture up? What were they thinking when they were 13, 14? And in anticipation now of their Senate confirmation hearing, where someone is now gone and pulled it all up, or the admissions office at State U is now got someone kind of checking out what the kid did at age 12, 13, 14, 15, and there's a whole bunch of really young people who go and find out things about a lot of these candidates. That's not a good thing. There should be a way in which that information is erased. And it would be the parents, of course, who will want to erase it, and that they have a right to do so when the technology makes it possible for them to do so. And again, this is not Big Brother. This is just Big Mother and Big Father saying, they were only 12, they were only 13, they were only 14 to the company. We want to be able to erase it. Do you think, Ms. Ramirez, that makes sense, that be a right that parents have to be able to have that technology available to them, and that they can erase it, not just on a discretionary basis, but it's their right to see it mandated to the company that they have to delete it for a minor, for a child?
I do believe that that's an interesting idea that is deserving of exploration, and we're happy to work with you in addressing that.
So you're not sure if it should be a right yet?
I would like to think about it further.
Okay, good. Chairman Janikowski?
Well, 2 points. One is the concerns about children are very real, very serious. And the second is empowering parents to do what they want to do when it comes to educating, protecting their kids is also extremely important. Number 3, technology, as you've indicated, can help solve this. Technology can provide these tools. And so I think this is a direction that makes sense.
Okay. Mrs. Strickling.
The principle no one can disagree with, but here's, I think, the caution I would urge everyone to keep in mind, which is for the legislature or for the regulator to be dictating technological solutions, I think, is something we need to approach with caution. We need to establish the principles, and that is important to do.
So the principle would be that the parents have a right technologically to have the information erased, and then it's up to the company to figure out what that technology is. Would that be okay with you? The principle is that parents should be able to get it erased. Do you agree with that principle?
Well, there's no way to disagree with that principle. Thank you. But I still would urge some restraint in terms of setting down in regulation something that could inadvertently and unintendedly lead to a loss of innovation on the Internet.
We would depend upon smart people to make sure that we didn't invoke the law of unintended consequences. We would mandate to you to do it, to protect children and give parents the right to do it, and to make sure that we don't invoke the law of unintended consequences. Do you think you could do that?
So, our model would say set the principle and then bring the stakeholders together to find the ways to do it.
So you can, is the same thing true on geolocation, that you shouldn't have a tracking device on a 12, 13, 14-year-old, that, that the parents should be able to have that shut off? Do you agree with that as well? Yes? I only have a minute left. Can you say yes, please?
Sure.
Okay, good. Thank you. Chairman Janikowski, it's not a good idea for a 12, 13, 14-year-old to have all this tracking information. Do you agree with that?
I'll say very quickly, I think there's a balance here that has to be done right.
I get it.
I have a 17-year-old. I want him to have a device. Where
how about a 12-year-old? A 13-year-old?
Whatever the right age is, but at some age, for emergency purposes, a parent might want to make the decision.
I got you. It's up to the
parent. But parental control is a powerful principle.
Okay, but the technology is there to shut it off for all other purposes other than our parents. That's what I'm saying. Big mother and big father. Do you agree with that?
I do believe that parents should be able to have control over that.
Okay, good. And finally, on the targeting of marketing, by these companies to children and minors, do you agree there should be a prohibition on targeting minors? We don't let people advertise on children's programming, the kind of products we don't think should be there, and they're all little kids. Do you agree as well that we should have prohibitions on the targeting of minors when it comes to, these internet and web-based services that are out there? Ms. Ramirez?
I believe that, again, parents should have control over it and should be able to provide consent.
And there should be a technology that makes it possible for them
to do
so. Yeah, good. Ms. Janikowski?
Basically, yes. There's a long history, as you know, in the television area, and I think borrowing from what we've learned there that's worked makes sense.
Okay, good. Thank you. Mr. Strickland?
I would agree with the comments already expressed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And the gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes Mr. Latta for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to our panel, thanks very much for being here to discuss this issue with us today. And Mr. Strickling, if I could start, on page 1 of your testimony, you noted that the Department of Commerce has been working with the Internet Policy Task Force and the White House to conduct a broad assessment of how well our current consumer data privacy policy framework serves the consumers, businesses, and other participants in the Internet community. Can you talk a little bit about how the recently announced National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace fits in with that assessment?
Certainly. That's an effort, again, a voluntary effort to allow industry to develop ways that people can operate in the Internet environment with a trusted identity that could replace passwords and otherwise improve the security any individual might have transacting business on the Internet. Totally voluntary. The goal is to have industry develop these tools with government serving as a facilitator or convener. It's very much part of our overall multi-stakeholder approach to how to deal with these Internet policy issues.
Okay, and just to follow up on that, because as we've been talking, the whole discussion is on the privacy end. If the individuals are to participate in the identity management system envisioned by the NSTIC, what protections will be in place to ensure the privacy of the information that they turn over to their credential provider?
Well, keep in mind that our role in this will be to work with industry to have them develop these sort of trusted identity mechanisms. It's not a program that we're going out to the public with to get people in the public to sign up for these. The idea, though, is to create what the market and what consumers would find to be a preferred approach to operating and transacting business on the Internet than the current system of passwords, which in many ways is quite insecure for people.
Well, have you, in your discussion though, with the folks out there that might be developing this, have they given you any indication how it might work then and to protect that?
This effort's actually headed up by NIST at the Department of Commerce, so I have not had any of those conversations with industry about how they would go about this, but the folks at NIST are leading this effort.
If I could I ask if you might be able to ask them if they could provide us with information with what they might have at this time on that? Would be greatly appreciated.
Certainly.
And if I could go on, I've heard there's certain allegations out there that certain foreign nations have more, pardon me, more onerous privacy laws on the books than we have here in the United States, but they seem to apply those laws mainly only to American businesses. What's the administration doing to ensure that privacy protections aren't being used as a means of preventing American companies from competing in the global market?
I'll take that one. We are involved in a lot of discussions internationally with the goal of trying to reach some interoperability of privacy rules around the world. We think it's absolutely critical for American business to be able to operate in other countries, and while those countries certainly have valid and legitimate interests in protecting the privacy of their citizens, we think it's in everyone's interest to find a regime or set of regimes that are interoperable with each other. I would mention that our emphasis on the creation of these codes of conduct by industry working with other stakeholders may be a way to bridge some of those differences between the privacy protections in our country as compared to those that might be employed in other countries. The idea being that that if we can get various of these other countries to recognize codes of conduct as an appropriate response to the privacy imperatives of that nation or set of nations, that gives industry an opportunity to create one operating approach that meets the obligations of many different countries. So very specifically in Europe, they are in the process of rewriting the European Union Privacy Directive, and we've had a number of conversations with the folks at the EU to talk to them about making sure that they have a role for codes of conduct as a way to meet these obligations. We see that as a fast way to achieve the interoperability our businesses need to be able to thrive internationally.
And if I could just echo this is a very important effort. The threat to American businesses, our economy, if this doesn't succeed, is very significant. And the opportunity to make progress internationally on a set of principles that can be complied with across multiple jurisdictions is a window that's closing. Because if many countries go ahead and adopt inconsistent regulations, ones that make it extremely difficult, expensive, impossible for American companies to comply with, reversing that will be much more difficult than working now, as the Commerce Department is doing, we are and others, to establish a level playing field internationally from the start of this very important growing industry.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I see my time's expired and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman and now recognize the gentlelady from California, Mrs. Matsui, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As I had said previously, in today's economy, information is everything to everyone. Even though we might think our personal information is that important on various things, you might throw things away, but it's important to somebody. And with ever-changing technologies and applications emerging, it's essential that we properly protect the private and personal information of consumers. We must do in such a way that doesn't stifle innovation. And as I said before, I know this is a delicate balance. But how do we find that delicate balance to ensure consumers are aware of what information is being collected and the scope of it while not stifling innovation? Why don't you start off, Ms. Ramirez?
Yes. The approach that the FTC has taken has been precisely to solicit input on these complicated questions to ensure that we do undertake a balanced approach. And the framework that has been proposed preliminarily in staff's report issued last December is precisely an approach that we believe balances the need for consumer protection here as well as the needs of industry.
And I would add to that, the process that our various agencies have undergone and the process that Congress has undergone through the hearings on this topic, they've actually led to growing consensus around some core ideas, focusing on consumer choice, transparency, and real data security. Obviously, there are a lot of issues in implementation, but I think where we are now collectively as compared to where we were a year ago reflects real progress. Obviously, now the difficult task of converting that into rules where necessary at agencies or not, because I think to the point Mr. Strickling made before, industry-led efforts here can have particular benefits if they move and if they put those measures in place.
Do you have anything further to add, Mr. Strickling?
Certainly. I'll make it easy for you. Pass legislation along the lines of what we recommend. Baseline principles, allow industry working with all stakeholders to develop codes of conduct and give the FTC the enforcement power it needs to enforce the baseline principles. I think that is exactly the balance we want to have. It gives industry the flexibility to craft specific rules of behavior that meet their needs and allow them to continue to innovate, but at the same time it's based on a bedrock set of a Bill of Rights of privacy that ensure that everyone gets a basic amount of protection.
Okay, thank you. Now, as you know, OMB is implementing a cloud computing initiative to improve government efficiency while saving taxpayers money. And I do support an initiative like this. Now, Chairman Janikowski, do you support cloud initiatives, and what kind of impact do you think it will have on our economy? And how can we ensure any potential privacy concerns with cloud are properly met?
I strongly support these cloud initiatives on the part of both government, large businesses, small businesses. They're efficiency enhancing, productivity enhancing. They'll save money. They're new areas of tremendous growth for our economy. It's an example of a new technology that poses, that has extraordinary opportunities, that also presents challenges. And there's no question that data security and privacy are some of the challenges. I would not tackle that by slowing down cloud computing. I would tackle that by working diligently hard with industry to make sure that security is fully protected and taking advantage of the extraordinary technological expertise that we have in this country to make sure that that happens.
Okay, thank you. As we all know, often these policies that we're talking about are drafted in complicated legal language. And more importantly, even if a consumer is able to understand the privacy policy of one company, the policies can't easily be compared from company to company. Thus, there's no means for consumers to comparison shop for privacy in any meaningful way. What can industry do to improve privacy policies and set some standards so that privacy practices can be compared from company to company? Ms. Ramirez?
I first want to say that I agree that privacy policies, the way they've developed, pose a significant challenge. This is particularly acute in the mobile arena when you have a very small screen and sometimes you have to scroll through 100 screens to read a single privacy policy. So one of the key elements of what the FTC has proposed in its framework is that there be simplified consumer notice and choice, and that's an essential feature of the framework that we're proposing.
Okay. I see my time is running out. Can you two just comment quickly on this too?
I agree. I think the importance of industry-led efforts to ensure compliance with these principles that I think there's broad agreement on: choice, transparency, real security, is an important part of what we all need to do going forward.
Thank you. And Mr. Strickling?
We totally subscribe to transparency and more simplicity.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Scalise for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know as we're all struggling with the balance between protecting privacy while also making sure that as people use the Internet, one of the great things about the Internet is that for the most part there are so many things you can do free, where there are services that are provided, but at the same time in many cases you're not necessarily paying for some of those services. And of course the hook comes in is that in many cases the things that you're doing on the Internet, there is some tracking that goes on, and ultimately it's sold to advertisers, and the advertising money that those companies make allows them to provide the service for free. So you've got to weigh that balance and make sure that we can protect privacy and then also allow for that ability for consumers who do want to participate in that transaction to be able to still have those services offered if they so choose. And I guess that's where we really get into the policy side, is how best to make sure that framework gives the consumer, the online user, the choice. I want to first just get your take on something. There was an article I read. It was called "You're Not Google's Customer, You're the Product," and it kind of poses an interesting, I guess, lays out an interesting scenario of what really is who's the product, who is the customer. And in many cases, you're a customer. If you walk into a store and you pay for something, you're the customer. And it seems like in some cases, some of these companies, not just Google, but all of the companies that have this kind of business model, you're not. Are you really the customer if you're really not paying for anything, but in fact your actions on their website is what is used for them to then go and sell advertising, and in essence would then the advertiser be the customer, not you? And then how does that relationship all come down to how you as regulators treat those various entities? And so if I could just get each of your takes on that business model and how you really view where is the user of the service in that transaction.
I'll give my first impression. I haven't seen the article, so I'm not sure exactly the context in which
ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record and make it available to the witnesses as well.
That'd be great. But I think I can answer your question, which is that what's key here is if you're collecting information about people. So I think there's nothing to be gained by a distinction between a customer and a non-customer or a product or whatever. The issue is information about you being collected by this particular entity when you go online to their website. And it needs to be made very transparent and in clear language, to you in whatever capacity you're coming to that website, what that information is and how it's going to be used. But I don't think the distinction is important. The question really is, are you collecting information about this individual when they visit your website?
Chairman Janikowski.
I would add this. We're in a period now in this country of tremendous technological and business model innovation, and that's a really good thing. It's part of what makes our country great. It's part of what will ultimately make our economy sound and strong. And we wouldn't want to be seeing this happen in other countries and not here. Now, new technologies, new business models gives rise to new concerns, and it's appropriate that we're having this discussion, this debate involving industry, involving agencies, involving Congress, to identify core principles that should be protected even as we encourage world-leading business model and technological innovation. And so it's why I keep coming back to, and I think Mr. Strickland, we all do, core principles that can help provide guidance even as we make sure we're encouraging world-leading innovation in technology and business models.
Thanks. Commissioner Ramirez.
We also recognize that consumer information is becoming a commodity, but we do believe that you can craft standards that take into account the benefits provided to consumers while at the same time providing protection. And to me, the core issue is, again, providing transparency, providing information to consumers so that they can exercise choice. And let me just use the example of the do not track mechanism that I believe should be implemented. I believe that there can be an intermediate approach that can be used where consumers can select what type of advertising they're willing to receive and what type of information about them can be collected, so that in that fashion advertising would continue, but for instance, if a consumer doesn't want to receive advertising relating to health information, that would not be done, but they could receive advertising.
Thanks, and I've got just a few seconds left. I wanted to ask Chairman Janikowski, in relation to a question that I think Congresswoman Blackburn had asked. I'm not sure if you were implying it, but it seemed like you might have been referring to the Internet as a telecommunications service. I mean, I wouldn't consider it a telecommunications service in that sense. Was that your intention, or?
I'm not sure I used that phrase. I may have referred to it as a communications network, and I think it clearly is.
But not a telecommunications service, because that would.
There's a term. It's
classification.
Term of art
issues that would.
Which I didn't intend to raise.
Great. No, I appreciate it. Well, thank you all for your answers, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman and recognize Mr. Rush for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, I certainly want to thank you and all the other very important people who have put together this hearing. And I want to thank all the witnesses for appearing before us today. I know they're quite busy, but it's good that they would come over and share with us their opinions and their conclusions. Commissioner Ramirez stated correctly, I believe, that individuals can and do have varying privacy tolerance thresholds. And these thresholds can and do turn on several variables, including who has their personal information and what that information, which is of personal nature, what it represents. And I introduced a bill in the last Congress, and I reintroduced it in this Congress. It's called the Best Practices Act, H.R. 611, which will require covered entities to obtain express opt-in consent from consumers for collection, use, or disclosure of particularly sensitive information or comprehensive online data collection. Among other things, it will require the FTC, it will give the FTC APA rulemaking authority to further modify over time the definition of what, quote, sensitive information, end of quote. Given how complex a person's decision-making process and all the dependencies that are involved, I'd like to ask each of the witnesses today, and especially you, Commissioner Ramirez, your opinion on whether such a grant of authority is prudent and would it make for a good public policy?
Again, let me just say that the FTC has not taken a formal position on legislation, but I will note that in the privacy report that was issued in December, the staff does recommend that sensitive information be provided both additional security, data security protections, and that consumers be given an opportunity to provide express affirmative consent for the use of that information. I also do believe that if legislation were to be enacted, that it would be beneficial to have the agency, to accord the agency APA rulemaking authority to make modifications should that prove necessary with regard to the types of sensitive information that would be protected.
Chairman,
I would just add that the less clear and more confusing disclosures are about how information is being used, the stronger the argument for an opt-in requirement. The more clear, easy to understand, transparent disclosures are, the weaker the argument is. And so it's an area where the industry can step up, provide disclosures about how they're using information, what they're collecting that are so clear that make it so easy for consumers to choose that there would be no need to have an opt-in, opt-out debate. If the industry doesn't do that and the disclosures are less clear, more confusing, I imagine we'll continue to hear from consumers saying, we don't understand this. We need some defaults.
Right. Mr. Strickland?
I guess I'd like to take your question up just one level because it could be raised about any number of things. And again, point out, our concern about getting too detailed and too regulatory in terms of specific prohibitions and the mechanisms that are used to implement them. What's important, we can all agree, is that there be meaningful consent. None of us can predict today what technology might be available in 2 or 3 years by which meaningful consent could be obtained from a consumer. And therefore, we are quite concerned about incorporating into legislative language or in rulemakings that by themselves will take quite some time to conduct, very specific approaches. To preserve the flexibility for business to innovate, we think this is a perfect example of where you set the principle and then ask industry, working with all stakeholders, civil society and other folks that are interested in this, to devise the rules of behavior that would actually be engaged in and which can be changed on a regular basis to accommodate.
I want to thank you. I want to move on to Commissioner Ramirez also stated that some consumers may be more predisposed than others to be taken advantage of, including consumers who are put on marketing sucker lists based on their past behavior. This may beg additional questions as to what could be deemed to be sensitive information. Along that line of logic, how sensitive would you say are other forms of compulsive disorder-related personal information about consumers, such as drugs, sex, gambling addiction, for example? How sensitive would those particular areas and other areas be to you?
And again, I'll turn to the recommendations that were made in our privacy report that do identify certain categories, such as health information, financial information, geolocation information. So those I would classify as being sensitive.
Commissioner?
I would agree with that.
We've, in our legislative proposal on data breach in May, we provided a list of what the administration would believe to be sensitive personal information, and I would refer to that list.
Are you back?
Thank the gentleman and recognize Dr. Cassidy for 5 minutes.
Commissioner Ramirez, you helped me last time understand what HIPAA applies to, what it does not. Your opening statement was kind of like a good Hemingway story. That first sentence kind of grabbed me and took me off with you. So when I go to CVS and I buy my Advil for my bad knee, is that HIPAA protected that I just purchased Advil over the counter or can CVS integrate that with other bits of data so now I start getting advertisements for Advil or other non-steroidals on my sidebar as I do the net?
If you go to a retailer, that would not be protected under HIPAA. HIPAA only covers things like hospitals, medical providers, so retailers would be able to use that information.
So I buy glucosamine chondroitin, just to tell you more about myself than you care to know.
I'm sorry, say that.
I buy something for osteoarthritis, and it's non-protected, it's over the counter, and they can integrate that with other things known about me since I have a little kind of rewards card. And that can go into this database that says, here's Bill Cassidy, let's tag this on.
That can be done, yes.
Now, what if it is a prescription medication?
Prescription medication would have other protections, but again, if, for example, one does research online, it's conceivable that certain personal health information could then be part of a profile that's compiled digitally.
Now, I go to PubMed, the National Institute of Health website I'm a physician, regarding medical information. I may look up anything I want to there. I'm a physician. So I look up hepatitis. Now that, I don't see things on the sidebar about hepatitis. So clearly it's possible to keep that even if I start off. But let me ask you, if I go to Google and just put in hepatitis, and I come up with Wikipedia, and I come up with PubMed, and I go to PubMed, the very fact that I put it into Google means that now Google knows I'm interested in hepatitis, correct?
Yes.
Now, what about my credit card company? If my credit card company, I'm purchasing airplane tickets to come to Washington, D.C., does American Express or U.S. Airs or Visa integrate that into my overall profile?
I want to note that the agency doesn't have jurisdiction over banks, so there are certain safeguards that apply to financial information that might be more strict. So there is a difference there.
Gotcha. The other thing I'm noticing that's in my inbox now, I will get an email from somebody suggesting that I have requested information from them, and I happen to know that I have not. It's almost a form of phishing, except it's kind of a pH phishing. Is this something that is common now, that some bank will say, you need to update your records, we see there's been a recent change, and so, or not a bank because you don't have banks, but some other company that basically entices me to go to their website to update my records even though I haven't used that service?
there are a number of scams that we're aware of where fraudulent operators may try to get confidential information from consumers.
So that may be the company or that may be a scam.
Consumers need to be careful about that, certainly.
Yes, I got you. And now the children's aspect of this, Commissioner, I guess it's you. I have a daughter who's 9, and she just kind of whizzes past. She accepts everything, okay? I'm struck that some of these do you accept are so long that unless you're an obsessive-compulsive attorney, you're just never going to read it. So is it possible to surely make me fully aware of this, but I'm not fully aware of it because it's somewhere on line 47 of paragraph 42? Do you follow where I'm going with that? How do we put it differently? When we ask somebody to opt in or opt out, an effective technique would be to bury it within long contract language. Is there currently any rule that would make the companies say, listen, if you're going to have them opt in, opt out, or agree to a certain type of advertising, it has to be understandable and not buried deep within a contract? Does that make sense? You're looking at me blankly. So was I?
I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if you were speaking to
whoever is
I'll
the
take
person.
this. Again, we do have concerns about long privacy policies. One of the key elements of the FTC's recommendations is that notice and choice be provided in a simple, understandable manner. There's no current requirement that that be done, but we believe that it's as a best practice, companies ought to do that.
Gotcha. And gotcha. Okay, well, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cassidy. And the chair recognizes Mr. Harper for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bono Mac. Commissioner Ramirez, I want to follow up on some questions or an area that Mrs. Bono Mac had done regarding harm to consumers. And does the Commission, or can the Commission provide specific examples of actual harm, or are we talking more of hypotheticals?
The harms that we're concerned about are not speculation. We have heard public reports of activities along the lines of the hypothetical that I used in my opening statement is actually happening. Insurance companies, for instance, today are developing models by which they can assemble information that's available to them through this aggregation of data that we've been discussing as a means of substituting what formerly would be more complicated underwriting analyses. So the potential is clearly there. There are public reports that these things are happening today.
Are you able to provide to us evidence or documentation of those specific harms?
The FCC, we're certainly happy to work with you to provide more details and information about those harms.
All right. Is there, as we look at this, before we look at additional regulations or we look at information, should the federal government be required to show what significant consumer harm exists to justify the type of additional costs that we could be talking about when it comes to market regulation on privacy or do not track legislation that might impose upon businesses?
I believe that if Congress decides to move forward with legislation, certainly one has to take into account the implications for all relevant stakeholders, yes.
Have you done any analysis of that potential cost?
What?
The cost to businesses for that?
Again, we have solicited comments and have received over 450 comments from industry, consumers, and other stakeholders. We do have a Bureau of Economics that's involved in our review, and we'll be putting out recommendations later this year.
Okay. And do you have a time frame later this year?
Later this year.
When you think that might be?
I'm afraid I can't be more specific.
We'll give you that much wiggle room.
Appreciate it.
Can you tell me how much we know about what information Internet sites collect about users, and how much do we know about the sharing of that information? I know we've covered that some in this hearing, but can you enlighten us?
I'm afraid that I can't quantify the scope. What I can tell you is that there is clearly a need for the principles that we're advocating. There's clearly a need for greater transparency. There's a greater need for companies to take into account privacy protections when they provide services and products to consumers, and a greater need for simplified choice.
You know, some critics have expressed concern that self-regulatory schemes could constitute a barrier to entry, perhaps erected by more powerful market participants against smaller and newer companies. How do we guard against such a result as that?
I do think it's a concern and that one has to take into consideration the impact on small and medium-sized businesses. It's an issue that the agency is looking at very closely, and we do intend to address the issue in our final report.
And what would be the best alternative to self-regulation? What is that going to work?
Well, that's an issue that I think you will have to ultimately decide on as to whether or not legislation is needed. But if there is, if one is to rely on self-regulation, what I will say is it is very important that there be an enforcement element. There has to be accountability, and I think the FTC ought to play a role in enforcement.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The Chair recognizes Mr. Olson for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair. I'd like to welcome the witnesses again and thank you all for coming and giving us your expertise and your time. And my first questions are for you, Commissioner Ramirez. And I want to kind of follow up on the line of questioning my colleague from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, was pursuing. But in December of 2010, the FTC issued a preliminary staff privacy report to open up discussion on consumer privacy issues. And in that report, it advanced the concept of do not track. This concept has been compared by the FTC and others to the National Do Not Call Registry already managed by the Commission. But in reality, they're very different. Do Not Call, as you know, was created because people were being bothered by unsolicited telemarketing calls, particularly during their dinner hours. But online advertising is not invasive in that way, the way telemarketing calls are, and consumers can simply ignore ads online when they come up. You know, in my experience, none of my friends has slammed their computer on the phone for online advertising, but I've seen many of them slam the phones on the floor because of repeated calls from telemarketers. And so there are many benefits to targeted ads online, such as giving consumers information about products and services they might actually be interested in. This type of advertising also has great value to consumers because this advertising revenue funds the free online content and service consumers enjoy. But I ask you, do you concur that Do Not Track is analogous to the Do Not Call registry?
I do not. I agree with you that there are significant differences. First of all, the Do Not Track system would not call for the creation of any kind of national registry. It's also not something that has to be implemented necessarily by government. So what the agency has advocated is we've put out various description of various elements that we feel would be important. But again, the key feature of it would be that it's a universal mechanism to allow the consumers that do have a concern about online collection and use of information to have greater choice and control over how their data is being used.
Is Do Not Track feasible now, ma'am?
Yes, it is. We have a distinguished team of technologists at the FTC, and a number of companies do agree there's consensus that it is feasible.
Again, kind of taking in my colleague from Mississippi's line of questioning, since you say it's feasible, have you performed any economic analysis of adopting a Do Not Track regime on our businesses?
No, we have not. And again, what we've done so far is simply to identify the elements that we think are important to a Do Not Track system, but we're not advocating a particular mechanism.
Are you planning on doing those?
We will be issuing final recommendations at the end of the year.
And those will include the impacts of the economic impact?
I can't comment on the details, but what I can tell you, as I mentioned before, is that we certainly understand the importance of taking into account the impact on business, and we think that a carefully crafted standard can be adopted that will both help restore confidence in the online marketplace, and I think businesses themselves recognize that consumer trust is vital.
Yes, ma'am. And I've heard from some companies that legislation is needed to create an online privacy framework that is technologically neutral, based on industry self-regulation, and enforced exclusively by the FTC. And with respect to technological neutrality, is it true today that the FTC and FCC would have jurisdiction over the download of a video on demand from a cable company, but only the FTC would have jurisdiction over the download of a video from an over-the-top provider like Netflix? Anybody can chime in there. You're the experts.
I think that's probably a correct description of the current framework.
So can we come up with a proposition where we can have some common system where there's one regulator?
I'm not sure that that's the answer. The FCC and the FTC have worked very well together over more than 20 years in areas of complementary jurisdiction to make sure that the expertise and experience that are different, that each agency brings to the table, informed solutions that get the balance right between taking account of impact on our economy and protecting basic values like privacy.
Okay, thank you for that. And again, with respect to industry self-regulation, and this is mainly for you, Commissioner Ramirez, can you please advise the committee whether the FTC uses industry self-regulation in other contexts to protect consumers, and what role the FTC believes industry self-regulation should have in protecting customers' online privacy?
Yes, we believe that self-regulation could play a key role. And in fact, the FTC alone cannot undertake the effort that's necessary here to ensure that consumers have basic protections. So I think we think self-regulation is vital, but again, provided that there is an accountability mechanism, an enforcement mechanism, and we believe that the FTC ought to provide that.
Thank you for the answer to questions. I see that the clock is going up, and that means I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. The chair recognizes Mr. Kinzinger for 5 minutes. Excuse me, can you check your microphone? Try the one next, yeah. Would you? Thank you.
Navy helping the Air Force.
Yeah, that's right. It's about time. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming out. I appreciate it. The explosive expansion we've seen in online marketing and tracking over the past few years has been unprecedented. From 2010 to 2014, the industry is projected to grow to about $2.6 billion from $1.3 billion in 2010. As a consumer who uses free services that have been made available by the Internet, I understand the value of behavior advertising and the effect it's having on this country's economic growth and job creation. Any privacy legislation that this committee considers must fully contend with the implications of what slower growth will have on both our economy and the services provided to the consumer. It's estimated that privacy legislation could cost the industry as much as $623 million in growth if legislation imposes limits on online tracking. I'm also keenly aware that the decisions we make in this committee will profoundly impact the question of whether or not privacy is still a right in this country. The accelerated accumulation of aggregated data over the past few years is troubling for many consumers. I believe one important action this committee should take is to determine what type of information is aggregated. Do a few companies control both sensitive health information and my shoe size? And as a consumer, am I allowed to know what information is stored about me? These are all important issues that I believe we need to consider when drafting privacy legislation. So while some of these may have been asked in a different way, I'll ask the first question to Commissioner Ramirez. What impact do you think do not track legislation will have specifically on free Internet service itself?
Well, I think it all depends on how a do not track mechanism is implemented, and of course that's the key question. What the agency, the FCC, has done is to outline what it considers to be the core elements that any such mechanism ought to have in order to assure basic protections for consumers and to allow them to have choice. And again, the emphasis here is on choice. I personally don't believe that I believe that a mechanism can be constructed that I would call an intermediate option that would allow consumers to have granular choice about what type of advertising to receive. And I think such a system would benefit both consumers and industry.
Okay. And I guess to all three of you, do you believe consumers have a right to know as far as what information is obtained and on them both in the online and in the offline space, and how do we determine what information is private and what's not? Again, this may have been addressed, but I'm curious as to how do we do consumers have the right to know, and then also how do we determine what should be private and what shouldn't? Just generally, I guess with Strickland.
Go ahead.
Yes, we think that one of the fair information practices should incorporate this notion of the consumers knowing what's being collected about them and how it's going to be used. As a broader point, though, I would just say that the specific regulation about how that be done is not something we propose that either Congress or a regulatory agency do. Again, we see the benefits, and this goes to your question about the costs that legislation and regulation impose on businesses. We think it's vitally important that we give industry the opportunity to take the principles and then create the voluntary codes of conduct that they will commit to live by without sacrificing innovation, without costing them the dollars that perhaps a less well-crafted regulation might impose on them.
Okay, sure.
I agree.
Are we all in agreement? Great, that's easy. Those are easy questions. No, I'm kidding. Do we know the amount of data that companies are collecting specifically, and do we know how that's being collected, bought, and sold? I know that's pretty basic, too.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite.
Yeah, do we know the amount of data that companies are actually collecting on consumers, and do we know how that's bought and sold?
As I mentioned before, I can't quantify exactly what's taking place. What we do know is that information is being compiled and that there are very significant concerns. Again, the hypothetical that I used in my opening statement highlights how this information can be used. And again, this is not speculation. That is happening today.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody's patience and everybody coming in and spending some time with us. And I look forward to continuing to tackle this problem. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rush has asked for a second round of a single question, and the ranking member and I have agreed to allow Mr. Rush to ask one more question before we conclude.
I really want to thank you, Madam Chair, and the ranking member for your kind indulgence, and also thank the witnesses. This morning and this afternoon, it's been asked over and over, what's the harm if a consumer website, a social network, or a supermarket knows about my personal habits and my private life? In today's testimony, references have been made to broadband's positive effects on job creation and productivity. So many Americans are unemployed and searching for work. Are there some issues that we may be overlooking regarding privacy safeguards that may be making it more difficult for Americans to obtain employment? Specifically, Commissioner Ramirez, has the FCC heard complaints from the public suggesting that their efforts to obtain jobs have somehow been hampered or harmed due to any privacy-related abuses?
Yes, and I think a number of the enforcement matters that the agency has brought, I think, shows that there is a failing sometimes with regard to basic privacy protections, and those are highlighted in the written testimony that I've submitted. But in addition to that, there is survey after survey that shows that consumers increasingly are very concerned about how their information is being used. So I think there is evidence that supports the idea that additional privacy protection is needed.
Mr. Janikowski, will you want to comment on this particular matter?
I think that the relationship between what happens in the privacy arena and achieving the economic and job creation potential of the Internet really are related. And so being very thoughtful about that is important. I mentioned in my opening statement the relationship between trust of the Internet and increases in broadband adoption in a world where almost all job postings are online. So I think you're raising a very important set of sensitivities that need to be very carefully considered in this area.
Thank you. Neil Banks.
I thank the gentleman, and on his point, I want to again reiterate that his question was a terrific one while we're here, and the extensive deliberations and thought we need to put into all of this as we move forward. And as you know, that this is the first in a series of privacy hearings that we will be holding this year, and I look forward to our continued discussions and our work together and how we can best balance these needs that everybody has brought up today. And it's clear to me, anyway, that personal data truly is the gold rush of our time. And I'd like to say Commissioner Ramirez in her written testimony referred to a statement by her fellow Commissioner Rush with his separate views on Internet privacy, and it has been shared with minority staff, and with unanimous consent, it will be included in the record, and without objection, so ordered. And I would like to thank my colleagues for their participation today. I'd like to thank the ranking members on both subcommittees as well as Chairman Walden. I would like to wish Joe Barton good luck tonight in the congressional baseball game and remind you all to attend if you're interested.
and remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record. I ask witnesses to please respond promptly to any questions they receive. And again, thank our panelists very much for your time today. And the hearing is now adjourned.